I would be concerned about, it's, are we in a situation now where we're going to be entering a very dangerous period right now and for the couple of years to come?
I think we are, and it's going to continue for a while. And thank you for mentioning my last book, Aftermath. The new book is The New Great Depression. But in 2019, I had a book called Aftermath. And if the viewers, if the listeners have it, or you get a copy, you can buy. Amazon always says, these 2 for deals. You get 2 books for almost the price of 1. But look at Aftermath, page 290. In that, this book came out in the middle of 2019, July 2019. I said, the chance of a pandemic in the next several years is close to 100%. And then I went on to say, following that, you should expect armed militias in the streets and riots in the streets. So there's nothing happened in 2020 that should have come as a surprise. If you read my 2019 book, I said the pandemic is coming and there will be armed riots in the streets. I said that before it happened. So with the new book, The New Great Depression, yeah, there's a deep dive on where the virus came from and the effects of the pandemic and how bad the recession phase of the depression actually is. But it really looks forward to 2021 and 2022. So my last book told you what was going to happen in 2020. This book will tell you what's going to happen in 2021 and 2022 and beyond. And coming back to Walter Scheidel, you're right. I read his book as well. And it really focuses, it's the rise and fall of civilization, but it really talks about income inequality, which is a big, big issue right now, has been for a while. And no one likes it. Everyone complains about it. Everyone's got a policy prescription. But what he shows, and he goes back to the Bronze Age. He actually looks a little bit before that, but at least the Bronze Age. So you're talking 4,000 years or over 3,000 years of civilization. He says there are only 4 things that solve income inequality: mass mobilization warfare, pandemic, a natural disaster, or just a collapse of civilization, as happened with the Roman Empire, because sometimes civilizations collapse by themselves. So there's your menu, right? Pandemic, natural disaster, warfare, and collapse of civilization. He said, other than that, that problem can't be solved. But maybe we're on our way with this pandemic. Interestingly, in the Black Death of the mid 14th century, so the 1350s to the 1360s, it's estimated that between 1/2 and 2/3 of the population of Europe was killed, 75 million people killed. But the following years, for a long time, it was very good for labor because it was a labor shortage. So it was the one time in the Middle Ages when people got a raise. There were plenty of knights and barons and kings around, but not as many farm workers. So commodity prices rose, wages rose, income inequality was solved. But it took 75 million deaths in the second worst pandemic in history to do it. So, if you're worried about income inequality, and you should be, don't look for an easy solution. Don't think that checks are going to make a difference or some other policy coming out of Washington will make a difference. The pandemic may in very unexpected ways, but ways that will be difficult economically.
For sure. And, you talk about an aftermath, and we have similar political leaning. So it's probably not easy for us to say this, but it's a reality that a lot of people that are incredibly wealthy, that have options, that have sophisticated asset protection and estate planning, a lot of assets like stock and real estate passes very favorably tax-wise to the next generation. Now that may be changing somewhat with the incoming administration, but arguably, again, that's what causes some of the bifurcation that we're seeing now between the haves and the have-nots. I believe the biggest risk to the ultra wealthy, and Mark Faber and others agreed with me, is what we're talking about now. It's not going to be a little bit more in taxation. It's going to be an uprising. It's going to be a groundswell. It's going to be what Gunlack talks about, violence to correct things. So I have concerns about that. And I know the families of wealth have as well.
Well, first of all, there's legitimate concerns. I love, I lived in Darien, not far from Greenwich. I know that's your base of operations for 35 years. So, you live in that part of Connecticut, you bump into, a certain number of billionaires, whether the investment bankers, hedge fund people, private equity people, or whatever. And I always love when they say, well, I live in a gated community in Naples, Florida, whatever. I'm like, really? Your gatekeeper is a 72-year-old retired greeter from Walmart. You think, and that's fine. I respect all work as dignity and all work, but you think that guy is going to stop an armed mob with, baseball bats and machetes and probably a few handguns trying to break down the gate? And the answer is, of course not. So and there were a lot of, in the Biden campaign, there were a lot of what they call the Chardonnay sipping, suburban housewives. And again, I'm not picking on individuals, but there was sort of I hate Trump, Trump's horrible, Trump's rude, obnoxious, vulgar, and all those things are probably true. So I'm going to vote for Biden. Leave aside the fact that Biden is in serious cognitive decline. Kamala Harris will be acting president before the end of the year. Get ready for that. But my point is, what happens when Antifa and BLM, I call it Bolshevik Lives Matter. What happens when those groups decide that instead of burning down their own neighborhoods, they're going to march out to the suburbs and camp on your lawn or camp in your backyard, or maybe the local park where you walk your kids? All of a sudden, these suburban housewives are going to say, well, what happened here? I thought it was going to be all good. They'll find out the hard way that social unrest is, you let the genie out of the bottle. It's very hard to get it back in the bottle. It spreads. This is when you have any tolerance for it at all, as they did in Portland and Seattle, and certainly New York City and elsewhere. It gets worse, not better. I mean, the lessons of history are when there's either a bully or a dictator or a tyrant or a conqueror, or somebody's coming in to your neighborhood, whether it be a country or a small town. There's this idea of appeasement. Well, just give them what they want and they'll go away. No, you give them what they want more, and they're never satisfied, and appeasement doesn't work. So we're in that dynamic. I'm not predicting the end of the world or total social breakdown, but it does. In my book, The New Great Depression, I talk about how the way to understand the economy is not to look at the 2008 financial crisis or the 2000 dot-com meltdown or 1998 long-term capital management. You do have to go back to the 1930s, to the Great Depression, to get some sense of what it's like. But politically, you might want to have a look at the 1920s, particularly in Europe. I mean, what was going on in Berlin and elsewhere throughout Europe, not just Berlin? You had armed gangs. You had the Reds, the communists, and you had what was called the Free Corps, which is the predecessor of Hitler's brown shirts and shock troops, killing each other in the streets of Berlin while people were, sipping champagne and going to the cabaret. So we're seeing a little bit of that right now. I mean, the group of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol building. I like a lot of Trump's policies, as a matter of fact, but I don't advocate breaking down the barricades. But after watching Antifa, terrorize major cities and shoot people and put up their own barricades, I'm not saying I condone it. I don't, just to be clear, but it comes as no surprise to see the pushback, and that's going to continue. So it's on both sides, and it's getting worse.